Welcome to this week's edition of Dugout Dish Podcast. I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Keith Glasser. Keith, how we doing?
Great, how are you?
I'm good. Got another edition of College Baseball Roundup with a great friend of the podcast, Jonathan Grosse. What's up, my man?
What's up, guys? Thanks for having me on tonight. Always fun to do kind of get a few in before we break down, some regional stuff in probably about a month or so, I would say. Why we're about.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun conversation. Let's kick this thing off. I think we all agree that there was a series this weekend that was pretty darn electric between two really, really good baseball teams right now. And Jonathan, I know you're on the Kentucky train, and we were just going over some RPI stuff, and that Kentucky-Tennessee series was pretty wild. So let's start it there.
Yeah, I mean, I said it earlier. When we were on the phone earlier, I was saying, like, I honestly think it was probably the biggest series of the year that took place in Lexington, this weekend. I mean, Kentucky comes out Friday, takes care of business they came back. Tennessee then takes care of their business on Saturday, and you're like, all right, well, we're up for a doozy here on Sunday. And, you kind of settle in just when you think, Kentucky has it in check. Bang, here come, the Vols. And I think they scored like 6 or 8 unanswered runs late. Like those last 3 frames were like 3-3-2 or 3-3 and something. Just really, really, really good series. And I think one of the things to look at is like, and I joked about this, Andy, when me and you talked about, 2 months ago, like when I was, not quote unquote throwing shade, but I was just putting doubt into people's mind of like what the SEC was. Like the SEC is as good as it's ever been. And I think that's good for, their league, obviously. And obviously they're the class of, college baseball right now, but I think it's also good for, some of the teams that maybe we didn't think we would see at Kentucky being, what are they, 16-2 in league, or 15-3, something like that. But, some different teams in there that, we maybe haven't seen in the past. Obviously, LSU's down, a pretty good amount. Florida's down a really big amount. But, we're kind of seeing some other teams in that league, and just shows the strength of that league, top to bottom, 1 through 14. And obviously when you add Oklahoma and Texas next year, 1 through 16. So I think that was my biggest takeaway at this point of the year. And I know it only happened this weekend, but it was like, man, that felt like that was a super atmosphere in the middle of April, which is really cool.
Yeah, that Kentucky team, I think, is caught. I mean, at this point, I don't think they're catching anybody off guard anymore. But going into the season, they certainly were not the team that you thought they are right now. And not you specifically, but I think if you asked a lot of college baseball pundits and, you start to line up what the SEC was going to be, they might be the biggest surprise. But I mean, what are they, 32-7, 13-2 on the road, which we were just talking about how difficult it is to win on the road in college baseball. And it doesn't matter what conference you play in. Playing on the road is always really tough. And to do that kind of stuff, that's not fluky. Like you're a for real ball club. You're not doing it with smoke and mirrors. And yeah, I'm sure they're pretty pissed that they ended up losing that game up 6 to Tennessee, but I mean, that's a ball club that people are they're gonna be tough to get through. If they're able to host in Kentucky, which they don't get to do that very often there. I'm sure that's got a chance to be a pretty electric atmosphere, especially with that facility and everything. Like they're a dangerous ball club right now.
Yeah, I think they're, I mean, right now, barring a fall off they're a national seed. That atmosphere is going to be electric. And I think that one thing too about Kentucky is that, and we joke because I've been on the Kentucky train a long time this year. They were kind of like my Oral Roberts in Oregon last year a little bit. Like, Kentucky's the same team every weekend. Like they don't deviate. Like they pitch, they play really, really hard, they play good defense, timely hits. Yeah, their offensive numbers are good, but like they just know who they are, and it's like they're kind of a treat to watch because you know every time when you turn on the TV, like what you're going to see, like, and that's really cool because you know they don't deviate, they don't need to do too much. They just kind of just show up with their hard hat and their lunch pail and just, you know, get to work. And, you know, and obviously it's paid off in the SEC, you know, and with them being in first, you know, tied with Arkansas or right with Arkansas. But it's just been cool to watch them not have to deviate at all. And I think they know who they are. I think Coach Mingione knows who they are as a club. Like, this is who we're going to see and, you know, come, you know, Memorial Day and post-Memorial Day when we get into June, like kind of, just a really cool story, I think, in Lexington this year.
And they got ran out of the stadium earlier on against a pretty good Kennesaw State team too. I mean, they got boat raced, I think, in two of those games where like we were all talking like, wow, like how is this happening right now? Like this shouldn't happen. And then kind of since then, I don't know if they've really. I think their only losses since then have been the like in league losses. I mean, they're a super fun team to watch. I mean, they went, you're right, Jonathan. Like, I mean, they went 5-3-3, 6th, 7th, 8th. Tennessee did. And I mean, Kentucky matched them 2-1, and they scored 2 in the 9th and brought the tying run to the plate in the bottom of the 9th. They went fly out, bolt, ground out, single, pitching change, fly out. You had the tying run on the bottom of the 9th for the 13-11 game. And they also out hit him 17-11. Like that's as good of an SEC series as you're going to get on the like this point in the year. And they had like almost 7,000 people at that game. Like that's electric for April baseball in the SEC. Like if you told me you were going to get that in the Super Regionals, sign me up, dude. I'd watch the entire series on the edge of my seat.
Here's the other question. You got those two teams. You got Tennessee and Kentucky, which are both, you know, kind of top of the food chain right now. But you still got Texas A&M and Arkansas. Is there a big gap between those programs right now? Like Arkansas and Texas A&M, for me, are the two teams that have not had a drop in performance all year long. Like Arkansas has lost one series in the SEC, which is inevitable that you're going to lose a series in that conference at some point.
On the road, too, to kind of get back to the point with that.
Yeah, like on the road. Is there a big gap there? Or like that's a question I have is like Kentucky's had the blip. Like they got punched in the mouth early in the season by Kennesaw State, as Keith just mentioned, but they've clearly found their stride. Tennessee had a couple games early in the season where it was kind of like, okay, like what do we got here? They're rolling. Arkansas and A&M, like it looked like Alabama was going to be a problem for A&M, and then nope, they just weren't.
Yeah, I mean, I think Arkansas, it's the same thing we've talked about before. I mean, we're 40 games in, and they're still pitching under a 3 as a team. Like, I mean, like it's absolutely absurd. All things like we're talking about
like a bad game. Honestly, they like a bad game, and you're like, yeah, they still won 5-3. Yeah, 3 earned runs now. Like, you know, it's kind of like, and you're like, what? Like,
yeah. I mean, they've given up 115 earned runs and 122 runs overall. I mean, they play defense clearly, and they pitch the hell out of the baseball. You got a 2.95 pitch in the SEC.
You got allowed that in like 2 weekends,
right? Like, I mean, it's and A&M. I mean, A&M is 4th in the country. They got a 3.5, and I mean, same kind of. I mean, they've given up a handful more, but like the pitching and defense is still. I mean, it's dominant. Like that is. We all know this. We've coached this game long enough. Like that's going to win you it keeps you in games and gives you an opportunity to win a lot more when you're able to defend and when you're able to flood the zone and get outs. Like, you know, I don't necessarily know that there's a huge step off between them, but I mean, it's kind of easy to argue when you're a sub-3 ERA and Kentucky's in the 4s, and Tennessee is in the high 3s. 3.98, almost a 4. Like, you're almost a full run better. You are a full run better than both of them, which is splitting hairs. But I think like there is, when you can pitch it at that level for this long and you can defend that well, like, I think it does separate you a little bit more than it's going to for some of the other teams. But make no mistake, I mean, Tennessee and Kentucky are the real deal. A&M and Arkansas are just a half step better, I think, right now at this point in the season.
I kind of disagree. I think it's those 4, and I know South Carolina's really good. Alabama's having a freaking great year, but I think there's more of a gap between those 4 and the next step down. And I know Alabama took the series from Arkansas and Alabama, but like you said, Andy, like, what do you? I mean, we won bad series, we're gonna default this. I just tend to think, like, even when you watch, South Carolina got 1 this weekend, and you're like, all right, like, it seemed like that was like a big deal for them. Like, I don't know if I can say that if Kentucky went to Arkansas and only got 1 or vice versa, like, I would be saying, hey, that's a great series for them. Like, I think I think right now on April 22nd, we all know how this works. In 30 days, we're going to be talking about something totally different. But right now, the body of work we've seen basically since Valentine's Day to today, those 4 are in a clear cut above. And I think there's some ACC teams in there as well, but there's a clear cut above that they are in right now. And then there's everybody else, I think.
Yeah, Keith, you were hitting on the defense and the strike throwing and the pitching from Arkansas. Like, that's a hallmark for Dave Van Horn teams, is they don't rely on having a huge offense to be really good. They rely on playing just nails defense with a bunch of premium athletes. You watch those guys take at bats, and they're super professional. They grind you out. They just kind of punish you throughout the weekend with these just heartbreaking at bats where they don't strike out. They're constantly getting good swings off. They play the snot out of defense. They got probably the best pitching coach in the country pulling the strings with a super talented staff. And the one separator for A&M right now is I do think they have that wow factor offensively, which makes them super dangerous when you got a guy like Braden Montgomery in the middle of your lineup. Like, that's the one thing Arkansas doesn't have right now. Now, Stovall's getting healthy coming off of that broken foot, and like, maybe he's that guy who he's like the dude that you don't want to face. But A&M has the guy you don't want to face. I don't know if Arkansas has that, but I'm going to backpedal a little bit and say that actually might be their strength, is the length of their lineup, and that there isn't really any easy outs up and down. And they just don't have that one dude where you look in the stat sheet and you're like, okay, that guy can't beat us. That might be the separator between them and A&M, but I think you're probably really, really splitting hairs.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have. I think you're dead on. I mean, our Arkansas is leading the country in ERA, and they're 4th in fielding percentage, and they're 172nd in batting average, hitting 272 as a team. A&M's hitting 313. I think you're right. Like, there's not necessarily someone in the Arkansas offense there where you're like, oh my gosh, we can't let this guy beat us. But, to your point, like, they grind out at bats. I mean, it's pretty impressive what they do. But I think we're splitting hairs with those top 4 teams on whether or not there's a huge separator between them. I think you're right, Jonathan. Like, there's a bigger drop off between those 4 and everyone else, and splitting hairs between the 4 of them individually.
Yeah, and I think if you look at it too, right? Like, if you want to throw some ACC teams in there, I think Clemson has to be in the mix. I mean, what they have done this year has been phenomenal. I think Florida State might even be in that mix. I think Duke and North Carolina might be in that mix. But I think you just have a clear, and I think I just rattled what was that, 8 teams, 7 or 8 teams. I think you have a clear 7, and then I think there's a drop. And I would throw East Carolina in there, and I know, it is the Americans. It's a little bit of a step down. They're 10th ranked league in RPI, so it's a little bit of a step down. But like what they've done, their body of work, I think is warranted, them being kind of in that mix as well. But like, I just think you have a good gap between that core 9 and then the next 9. And that's not to say that's going to be the 8 in Omaha or 9, 8 in Omaha or the 9 left standing. Like that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying right now, as we sit, I think that there's a clear body of work with a group of teams, and then there's kind of that next tier.
Yeah, and that next tier's got a couple interesting squads. Like Clemson's been the most consistent team in the ACC.
For sure.
Week out. But Duke's had some electric weekends.
Yes.
And then there's that Wake Forest.
And the other part of that too, Andy, don't forget, is like, let's not forget, Florida State had leads in both games against Clemson in Clemson. Now they did blow them, so we have to obviously get what the end result is. But Florida State's Link and that crew has done a heck of a job really quickly. Leads in Clemson, who knows what it's like on a neutral site, when they go to Raleigh.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And then you got the Demon Deacons who should have freaking squashed them while they were down because they look like they're hitting their stride right now. Like Hartle, Keith, you mentioned this earlier. Hartle struggled early in the beginning of the year. Like you're talking about a dude who was looking like a top half of the first round lefty based on his track record his first 2 years in college and really struggled out of the gate. Like no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like he got hit. He wasn't getting swing and misses, walking more guys than he usually would. He's starting to figure it out. Chase Burns has been every bit as good as advertised. And now Nick Kurtz is back. And that dude right now, would he have a stretch? 13 bolts in 9 games? And people are trying to pitch around him?
There was a game. He was intentionally walked in like the first inning. I want to say of one of the series. Like they were just like, no, just put him on. Like we're not even going to do this anymore. Yep. Which is like that doesn't happen.
Because you guys are going to laugh, but because I did say it earlier, everybody in college baseball might have missed their shot to beat the Deeks because you might have had your best shot, and unfortunately it was in late March, mid-March, and here they come, and they could be an absolute problem, because you're looking at in a super type of setting. Obviously they got to win a regional, but in a super type of setting, you're talking about having to beat either Burns or Hartle, and then having to win Game 3 on Sunday or Monday.
And
I don't know, man. That seems like a tall ask to me.
And those, like, shout out to Billy Solano and what he's done with some of those young offensive players. Like, and they got some transfers in the mix there, but like, Sawyer, super talented kid, but it's a big step up from the ACC. Like that kid's looking super dangerous. The Winay kid, like talk about a kid making a big jump. Like that's development. And that's what Billy does as good as anybody in college baseball is he develops guys. And those young dudes, when Kurtz was out of the lineup, they got asked to do more. And it's one of those things that at the back end of the season, when you stick Kurtz in the middle of the lineup, he takes the pressure off of those guys and everybody gets better. And I think you're starting to see that where some of these young guys have gotten a chance or been put in kind of a pressure situation where they need to perform without the comfort of having Nick Kurtz to bail you out or to just really stress the pitching staff. And those guys have gotten better. The Tellier kid has been awesome for them offensively, and it's starting to come together. And some of those dudes at the back end of the bullpen, they got Roland back, who, Jonathan is a pitching coach. Like, how important it is when you got your main bullpen dude back. Like, he makes everything easier for you. And a couple of those young cats, like the Morningstar kid, starting to figure it out. And now you get a little bit longer. And what was perceived as a weakness in February and March, where their bullpen was really a problem, might not be that big of a problem anymore. And if you've got Burns and Hartle right on Friday and Saturday, you're a lot more flexible on Sunday when you have 3 or 4 bullpen guys that can come in and get you 6 outs and be successful. And like that Sunday game gets a lot shorter than it usually would be because you don't have to burn dudes on Friday and Saturday because Burns is going to go out for 110 pitches and punch 15 dudes. Like they've made a big change. And to your point, like they're going to be a tough out if they continue to move the way they're moving right now.
Yeah, I still believe it. I think you hit the nail on the head. Like you made everybody better because all they did was play with those guys, to use some of those guys in spots that they didn't need to use them in, or maybe they weren't ready for quite yet, but they did. And now you got Kurtz back. Now you got Roland back. Now you got these guys back, and now all of a sudden they are guys that have had experience in bigger spots than probably what they needed to. And now some of the lesser spots in the game, they're easier to navigate for them, especially on the mound. And like I said, if you wanted your shot at Wake, you might have had to take it already because it's gonna be tough now, with them getting healthy. So I love the Demon Deeks. I know I said about 8 or 9, but I think in terms of a team that's surging, I wouldn't bet against them to get to Omaha at all right now.
No, I think that'd be tough. I mean, the Kurtz kid, I don't think he can go understated what not having in the lineup for 6 games or whatever, because he's currently hitting 340 and leading the team in bolts with 17. He's 1 off the lead in RBIs, outslugging everybody. Total bases tied for the lead. Here's the other crazy thing. He's got 40 walks, 2 hit by pitches, 19 punchies. Least amount out of everyone who starts, as much as you'd expect at this point in time. Like, that dude barrels baseballs, puts them in play, and gets hits. Like, that's an impressive number for a dude who has the juice that he has. That he hits in the middle of the lineup, everyone's saying, like, you can't let this guy beat you. And he's 2-1. He's 2-1 walk to strikeout with 17 bolts and hitting 340 in the middle of a lineup on a team that was number 1 team in the country and is creeping their way back in. And I mean, my goodness, can this kid hit? But I think you guys are both, like, everyone's right. We all know this. We've coached this long enough. Like, you get someone like that back in your lineup that's healthy, like, and he can do the things that he's capable of doing. It takes a lot more pressure off a lot of other guys. And all of a sudden, like, they had to play in those spots, and now it's now the moment isn't too big for them anymore in the spots that they find themselves in. And obviously for the future, that's a positive because those kids are going to find themselves in those spots, next year and in subsequent years after that. So long run, it might benefit them a little bit to have had that a little bit of adversity. And we all coach this game long enough to know, like, you're going to hit runs like that, and if you're anybody who loves competing, like, you'd rather hit those runs in mid to late March, early April, and get it rolling at the back end of May, where you're like, okay, we got this thing well oiled at this point in time, and rather than the inverse of that. So they're going to be tough down the stretch, and it's going to be fun to watch.
I want to touch on the West Coast team, partially because I love their pitching coach, but the Arizona Wildcats have made quite a little bit of a surge here, up in the 16th right now. I think they've won their last 4 series on the weekend. I think they've won 9 of their last 10 or 10 of their last 11, but Arizona is rolling. And I wanted some interesting numbers here when you're talking about the impact that a really good coach can have. They were one of the worst pitching staffs. They were the worst pitching staff in the Pac-12 last year. And they've gone from the worst pitching staff to one of the best pitching staffs in the country. They're number 1 in the country in FIP. They've got the least amount of walks. They got the least amount of walks per 9. They got number 1 strike rate in the country, number 3 in walk to strike ratio, number 8 in ERA. Like, just a remarkable job out there by Kevin Vance. And I know he's got an analytics crew that helps him out there, but that turnaround, little bit of a slow start, but they're looking like the best team not named Oregon State in the Pac-12. And the end of the year, you're going to find out who's going to win that conference probably with that series when Oregon State comes to Arizona. But they're one of those West Coast teams, because I know we kind of dumped on the West Coast the last time out here about how, you've got some marquee programs that are really down right now. But Arizona's surged, and I just think what they've done out there is pretty darn impressive and something worth touching on here.
No, I think it's an awesome point. Like, you go from worst in the pack. I don't care what league it is. You go to worst, whatever. You go worst to first with pitching numbers. I mean, it's a direct correlation of, the guy you hired. If you made a change at the end of last year, which they did, he's done a phenomenal job. I think looking at the numbers, I think that if they can kind of put together a really good next 30 days, I think that they can get back into the hosting, category. But to that point, and nothing against what they've done, because they've done a phenomenal job. Vance has done a phenomenal job. I just don't know out west. If you look at these RPIs and you look at the rankings and stuff like that, I don't know how many West Coast hosts we're gonna have. And I know that's a topic of discussion. And if you talk to a West Coast, coach, that they feel like the RPI is skewed to the East Coast. But when you look at this, I mean, the Pac-12's 7th in RPI as a league. The Big East is ahead of them. Again, nothing against the Big East, but the Big Ten and the Big East should not be ahead of the pack. I can argue for SEC, ACC, Big 12, Sun Belt. I have no problem with any of them. They're all better leagues than the Pac-12. I know people from the West Coast will get upset about that. It's not even close. The Sun Belt's better than you guys. It's not even a consideration. And then the Pac. But the Big Ten and the Big East, come on, man. That's insane.
I think you're right. I think the winner of if I was a betting man, the winner of Oregon State, Arizona at the end of the year will have a claim to be a regional host. I don't know. I don't think they're no one's going to be an 8 national seed. You know what I mean? There won't be a national seed though, but I could see them. I could see them being hosting a regional. But you're going on the road for the supers. There's not going to be a super host, I think, out west.
The hard part too about with Arizona now, obviously Oregon State, I think, is a little ahead in terms of the RPI, so it helps Arizona less. But if Oregon State goes down there and wins a series at Arizona, which will be a very, very, very good series, when they'll get a host site.
Mm-hmm.
You'll go to Corvallis. But my concern is what if Arizona does what they need, they do what they continue to need to do. They win a series on the road, they win a series at home against Oregon State. What if the RPI doesn't budge that much? Because what if Oregon State's RPI drops enough that you could be looking at basically Santa Barbara or Irvine, but they're going to have issues too between the two of them, because they're going to have home series wins that are going to basically not move the needle. And if they lose a game on a weekend, that they're going to get penalized by a ton because the RPI is so bad. I mean, you look at the Big West is 13. You go through this. I mean, you're talking about, you got Long Beach is in the 190s, Bakersfield's in the 270s. Bakersfield, if Bakersfield comes to Fullerton is 210, which is absurd, which I didn't realize. They're 5-13. My goodness. You're looking at Riverside's 252. I mean, you're talking about bad series that if you don't sweep a series basically against some of these opponents, you're going to get pummeled in the RPI, which hurts because Santa Barbara and Irvine are both playing UCLA in the midweek, which is garbage. It's an embarrassment what's going on in LA. USC's played better recently, but they're not even getting helped in the midweek with a road win or even a home win because some of those traditional Pac-12 opponents are so bad. So the West is running into an issue here that, yes, you're probably right, Keith. Barring something crazy, Arizona or Oregon State will host as a top 16. They're not going to be a national seed, though. I don't even think I think we're past that point, actually. Unless one of them plays, probably Oregon State, just because they're a little bit higher in the RPI right now, that they could probably play their way into a national seed. But, I mean, how many host sites are we going to have on the West Coast? 1, 2, at maybe
I don't know if you're getting 2.
2 best case scenario, like to your point, I think that
if Santa Barbara does a good job, they'll host potentially.
But like you said, you have one. If they have one slip up on the weekend that isn't UC Irvine, they're going to cancel each other out. So one of them's out because they're going to play each other, and you have one slip up. You go to Cal State Fullerton and lose a series somehow, like your chances of hosting a regional.
In the RPI.
Yeah, it's a interesting state of affairs out there for, and you're talking about historically marquee college baseball programs: Long Beach State, Cal State Fullerton, UCLA. I mean, USC still has the most national championships of all time.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, and we talked about this during the week, excuse me, but you had a middle of the pack Big 12 team in Kansas State who came east midweek and played UConn and Northeastern. And I mean, Kansas State is in the 30s, right? They're 34th in the RPI. Like that's telling you something. Like there's not much obviously going on midweek in the Midwest for them to be able to do stuff. So they will get on a plane and go play UConn and Northeastern and get bumps out of it if we win. It's an interesting state of affairs because when's the last time we saw that?
No, when I say
you might see it. You might see it in late May, but when you see it in April?
No, but I said that to when Andy was, when we talked about it, I was like, I respect it, man. Like they need help with the RPI. They do need help with games out there as well. In terms of like who you can get midweek, and Coach Hughes is from the Northeast. Maybe he wants to recruit the Northeast more. Like, do it. Like, challenge yourself. Like I said it on the first podcast. Or our first dugout when we did college baseball roundup. I respected Santa Barbara coming to Campbell so much. Like, do that. Like, if you guys want to, complain about the RPI, it's the east of the Mississippi bias. Then come and play. Play. Come and play some of the mid-majors. I'm not telling you have to go to Arkansas. I'm not telling you have to go to Texas A&M or Mississippi State or, Florida, whoever. But even Florida, right? St. Mary's. I give St. Mary's a ton of respect. They got on a plane. They flew to Florida. Maybe they thought they were going to be a regional type of team this year, an at-large team. Do it. Like if you think you're that good, get on a plane and do it. Because I think there's enough money being thrown around now at this level that you have that option. Spring break, early in the year. We saw Santa Barbara did an opening weekend, which is crazy because it was probably freezing in North Carolina and they're used to 80 and sunny. But do it. Like go and win a series, and then when that team's really good and they go to North Carolina and lose on a Tuesday on the road, their RPI is still going up. Your RPI is still going up.
Well, look at the 2 teams that traveled east on the 2 other teams. I'm sure there's other ones, but the 2 that stick out to me is like San Diego came to Texas, and they're sitting in the top 40 in the RPI right now. I think they're 31. Like that's because they came and played a challenging schedule, not because they've won. They're not 36-4, right? What are they? 26-10 or something like that. 26-13. But their RPI is in the range where they could get an at-large because they chose to come and play a team that's going to have an RPI. Santa Barbara is the same way. Like they're sitting in the top 20 in the RPI. Part of that is because they came and played a good school early on in the season and didn't bring some below average team down to get 3 wins. They went and challenged themselves. And I mean, I'm 100% on board with you there, Jonathan. And like, you can either make it an excuse or you can do something about it.
One further, even right. If you look at even Irvine's schedule, Irvine, well, they didn't come east, but Irvine played in that Dodger Town Classic or whatever it was at Dodger Stadium. They challenged themselves out of league instead of playing 4 East Coast teams on spring break from the Northeast at home where you're pounding them. They challenged themselves. Like that's what the teams on the East Coast do every Tuesday. So you can't do that every Tuesday because of the way it works with scheduling and everything else. So do it early in the year, and that's why you look at San Diego, and San Diego is 31 in the RPI.
Yep. You can either make an excuse of it or you can do something about it. And
exactly. And I honestly believe I think Checketts did it, and I think whoever made the schedule, St. Mary's did it. St. Mary's went to Florida. When do we hear these WCC schools or some of these WAC schools going to Florida or going, to just the state of Florida? Kansas State, Keith, like you said, 34th in the RPI, went to UConn and Northeastern on the double midweek in the middle of April. Whether you want to call that recruiting, whatever, they did it. That it is what it is.
Yeah, they picked 2 of the best in the New England area and said, we're going to come play you guys midweek and see what happens. And they got beat 4-0 and won 9-8. And damn well, because we're all Northeast and New England guys, they're gladly going to take that game. Jim Penders isn't going to shy away from playing anybody, and nor is Glav at Northeastern. Like, hey, you guys want to come play? Like, yeah, man, let's roll it out and see what happens. Because that, as Northeast teams, that's what you have to do for the first 6 weeks, anyways.
They both might need help with their RPI,
right?
So now a Kansas State home win. Kansas State. So UConn's 36. I don't know what Northeastern is, but UConn's 36. Kansas State's 34. So that win at home was massive because it's a top 30 win or top 40, top 50 win, whatever they call them. Top 50 win RPI for UConn at home. That's a monster win.
Northeastern's 40th.
So you're talking about two top 40, and Kansas State didn't lose a budge on either of those. Well, they jumped obviously with the win, but they didn't lose anything with the loss.
Right. And from the New England standpoint, if I'm Northeastern and UConn too, you have to go play a bunch of pretty tough teams on the front end of the schedule because you have to play on the road for the first 5 to 6 weeks anyways. Now you're kind of the midway point of conference. Let's see where we stack up right now against another top 50 team. We might not see, if you're with Big East, you might not see another top 50 team for the rest of the year other than just going and playing Northeastern and BC. And I don't even know where BC is right now. But my point, you get what I'm saying. Let's see where we stack up here.
And Northeastern doesn't lose anything from the RPI standpoint either, because it's this is one of the best. It's a top game on your schedule. They didn't budge from that loss.
No, Boston College. They're top. They were top 50 before the weekend, but still, they're playing the ACC. They'll bump up again in the next couple of weeks, based off of who they're playing. But you might not see, if you're Northeastern, you might not see another top 50 team for the rest of the year. Why not do it now?
Absolutely agree.
Well, speaking of Northeastern, they went out to Arizona.
Right.
They schedule for that because at this point in that program, they can win 38, 39, 40 games. And they know that while the CAA is a really good conference, you can't rely on that conference schedule for your RPI. You got to go play. You got to play UConn.
And I think that's the biggest thing. I think that's the biggest thing to take of all what we're saying is and it's not a West Coast, East Coast thing anymore. And although it might have been that for a long time. It's like you can't just schedule how you've always scheduled and just think that you can host, you can be a national seat. You have to think differently because there are certain programs and there's certain regions and conferences that you have to do things different. Glav 5 years ago didn't need to go to Arizona. Outside of, unless the guarantee was that big, those guys didn't need to go there. Now they need to go there, win a game, hope, Arizona's a top 25 RPI team. That's a monster win for them. So now when they're right on that line of getting in or not getting in because maybe they don't win the conference tournament, which happens, right? Like we're dealing with 18 to 22-year-old kids. It happens. You might not win the conference tournament, even though you win the regular season. You're in because of what you did with your body of work early, midweek. So, and obviously in conference that now you're a slam dunk 3 seed and it's not even a question.
Yeah. And I think there's, the Pac-12 didn't even have a conference tournament until after COVID, I think. Like, they for years you didn't have it. Like, there was no conference tournament. Whoever won it won the auto bid, and then they'd get at larges.
Which
while
is
while everyone else, like, there's a certain amount of hubris to it. But like, the ACC and the PAC and the SEC are like, they're bumping their RPI in the tournament by playing each other again on neutral sites. Yep. And then, wondering, like, which arguably they've become the 2 best conferences in college baseball. Like, they're all playing each other again. Now we're bumping our RPI. Like, now we're giving ourselves more of a chance to get at large bids while we're just going to play our regular season and, hey,
ACC,
we're done.
And the best of the ACC didn't even do, like, it's a quasi tournament, but it's basically just a 3-game round robin.
Yes.
Let's just boost our RPI as high as
I don't even know how it works. Like, there's teams that are in it. Like, all of a sudden you're like, oh, I think this team won. And you're like, no, we're onto a 3-team tournament now.
I watch it. I swear to you guys, I watch it every year, and I'm always like, the tiebreakers on, like, that's like whatever that day is. Like, I guess it's like Thursday. I think it is
Thursday. I think.
They don't do the tiebreakers because everybody's 1-1 in the pod, and you're like, all right, well, how do the tiebreakers? Well, yeah. And I'm like sitting there, and I'm like, oh my god, it's amazing! Like,
yeah.
they have the key to the code. Like, they literally did it. Like, all their RPIs have gone up an absorbent amount. Unless you lose to a really, really low seed, which they don't have I think they leave out 2 or 3 teams. Your RPI is going up because even the loss, your RPI is going up.
Well, in the beauty of the tournament from a strategic perspective, from the conference view, is that it can't hurt the top 6 teams in the conference because they're all getting in anyways. If you're a top 6 team in the ACC, you're a freaking lock.
Right.
Most of the time, if you're a top 8 team, you're a lock. But those 9th and 10th teams can play themselves into the tournament by winning 3 games. It's really that simple.
From a mid-major that doesn't win the tournament.
Yep.
And all they did was they just figured out a way, like you said, Andy, is like top 6 in, top 8, even in the ACC or the SEC. I'm sorry. The SEC, they play like all these games to get to the teams that are in it at the end. But every time they play a game, it's RPI up, because it's neutral site.
Well, think about when Ole Miss won the Natty. I mean, they were one of the last teams in the SEC because I don't think they take everyone, or it's a play-in for those bottom ends. And then they ran the table. They ran the table, won the tournament, and I think they were still a 3 or a 4.
No, they didn't even win a tournament. They won like 3 games on Hoover and then got in as the last team in as.
Yeah. And then ran the table. But they don't get in without the
tournament.
Yeah. Hoover.
And they win the national championship.
Yep. I mean, if you think you're a team, if you're in a conference that isn't ACC or the SEC, I think even at this point, if you're a Big 12 team, you have to challenge yourself because that's not a 6-bit or 7-bit conference anymore. It just doesn't seem like it, right? Like there's some really good teams in there, but like it's not nearly as deep.
I think their non-conference is strong enough. They don't have to do too much for most of them, I think. Because I think, like, right, like you look at like a Lamar, right? Lamar's 55th. Lamar's 9-3. They're 38 overall. If you're at TCU and you play Lamar,
not killing.
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't budge either way. It probably helps you with a road win if you go up there.
But if you want to get in, you got to play those challenging games because, to your point, like you're splitting hairs at the back end. Like you could be a 36-win team in a middle of the pack conference, and like you're not getting in if you haven't played a really tough schedule.
Nah,
like that's why Northeastern does what they do. That's why UNC Wilmington and Charleston do what they do, where they go and they play Clemson and they play South Carolina and they play Duke and Wake and North Carolina. Like they play all those teams because they know that winning that conference tournament's freaking hard. And you want to put yourself in a situation where if you are a 36 or a 37-win team, which those schools routinely are, that you have a chance as an at-large. And if you, no offense to like A&T, like NCAA&T, but if you're Wilmington and that's who you play midweek, you're just hurting yourself. It's better to lose at Wake Forest than it is to win at home versus A&T for them. And if you go and win one of those games, like that might be the reason you get into the conference tournament or into the NCAA tournament, excuse me.
Because it could be a 20-point RPI swing. That's the reality.
But it makes it better for the game in the long run.
No doubt.
Because like if you legitimately go and try to play the better teams, like where you're going to be able to see what happens, and you're going to eventually get to the point where you are going to get the better teams into the tournament because you're not just relying on the fact that you're just going to continue to beat up on everyone who's around you who's not that great. And well, hey, we have 40 wins. Like, yeah, 25 of them are against, sub 150. Like what is that doing for us? But I mean, it's going to be different, obviously, with all these huge conferences we have going on. But like it's still going to hold true. If you're middle to the bottom end of that conference, like you can't just rely on you being okay to below average in that conference that you're going to be able to sneak in. Like you're going to have to go play somebody else.
I mean, I think if you look at it, isn't that what's really the best for this game?
Yes, that's my I think it's great.
Like we're like the West Coast, if they want to complain, if they don't think the RPI helps them, and who knows what will happen, obviously with the mega conferences next year and stuff like that. But like we have teams on the East Coast that are doing the same thing. I mean, we got mid majors that are going for it. So like everybody should be doing it. You should be playing the best opponents. You shouldn't be scheduling cupcakes on a regular basis and then barking that you're not getting in because of West Coast bias or East Coast bias, whatever you want to call it, against teams east or west of the Mississippi. It is what it is. Put the best teams in.
So you got a couple examples. It'd be interesting to see how they handle this. But like you got USC and UCLA both going into the Big Ten this year. If you're traveling to go play Rutgers or Maryland, and you don't find a way to make a stop and go play Virginia or Virginia Tech on your way over there, like you have to take advantage of that trip to boost your, like there's no excuse anymore, because if you're going to fly to the East Coast to go play a conference weekend, you better pick up one of those really good midweek teams.
You might end up seeing some East Coast, what they call the West Coast special Monday games. Because they travel so much when they're in town, they just stay and play an extra day on Monday instead of playing a midweek. Like you might see some of those with the West Coast coming east and the East Coast going west, where it's like, hey, we're going to play Maryland. Like we should play on Monday against UVA or Virginia Tech or Wake or whoever it is, and see what happens.
Especially with those West Coast teams, the time change and like how the flights work, like. I think you'll definitely see that.
And I think you have to.
That'd be great. I think it's great.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Listen, all that's health. This is all healthy for the game, which is amazing.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what those schools do and how they schedule. Because, like, if you're Stanford coming east to play in the ACC and you don't pick up, like, you go to play Clemson and you don't pick up a midweek against South Carolina, like, I don't know what you're doing. Like, you got to play that game.
Yeah, well, why wouldn't you, right?
Are you going to play Winthrop?
You can play, well, but like you could play South Carolina, or we'll name any good team, Sun Belt, whatever. But like, it's either that or you can go back and play Pacific on a nothing against Pacific personally for all our Pacific fans out there, but like they're not the same team on your schedule. Like you go to South Carolina and potentially beat them, like that's a huge win for the program and a huge RPI boost. Like the other is not. Just is what it is.
Yeah, pretty simple. Pretty simple. What other topics we got here? I had a couple other ones that I wanted to highlight, a little bit of smaller scale.
I thought the only I'll say it because I saw it today and I wanted to touch on it because we went very heavy on mid majors last year. Was Indiana State sneaking into the top 25 for the first time this year?
The Sycamores. Who's the most famous alum from Indiana State?
And they hosted last year. Larry Bird. They hosted last year, and back in the top 25 in mid-April. Like their Sycamores might be around again this year.
You're going to host again this year too, right now, the way it stands. I mean, they might be a national seat when it's all said and done.
Which is wild how they're not a top 25 team all year, and then it just kind of works its way out. Like we're getting to the point where the preseason rankings don't matter anymore. Like people, and we had this big conversation about Florida. Like Florida hung on into the top 25 simply because they were a top 10 team in the country going into the season. But now you're seeing the top 25 is a much more clear reflection of where teams are after, we're up into like 39, 40 games now, right? Like this is a true reflection of who the top teams are.
For sure. I totally agree with that.
So what else we got?
One of the things that I think is wild is that if you would have told all of us, and I don't care who you are, how much you know college baseball, how much you research college baseball, if Hoover was starting tomorrow, which is Tuesday, Hoover starts on Tuesday in the SEC tournament, that Auburn and LSU would be at home. Would anybody have that as a lock of the century?
No.
No. Florida's fighting for their life. Like, yeah. Wow. Defending national champion is more likely than not will not be included in postseason baseball, may not play postseason baseball of any fashion.
No, I didn't have that. I wouldn't have had that on my bingo card.
I said that to you guys. I said, bingo card 2024. Auburn, LSU, home from Hoover. Florida, basically. I mean, Florida yesterday in the seventh inning, somebody tweeted, I think from D1 Baseball, which was a phenomenal tweet. Like, they were down 2-1 in the sixth. They ended up winning. I think they ended up winning 7-2. But they were literally fighting for their lives yesterday in Columbia, Missouri, against Mizzou. They were down. And it was like, this is it. Like, this is literally it for them.
Mm-hmm.
And they figured out a way to win, and they might still figure out a way to get into Hoover and do whatever they got. But
if you had them at 20-19, 39 games into the season, nobody had that either.
You off this podcast, and I'm like, you guys are two of my best friends. Am I wrong?
No.
Imagine if you take Jack Caglione out of that lineup.
No comment. I'm done.
That kid's a
3 games or something, like some ludicrous number. And he's almost an automatic win on Sundays.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, what an interesting turn of events for Florida. It'd be interested to see how they reload this offseason. And, maybe they get hot here the last couple weekends and kind of play themselves into the conversation. Because if you get to 30 in the SEC, if you can get to 30 wins, like you're usually in pretty good shape. But
but it doesn't get easier. You have Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky.
They
might lose. They might lose the next 9 SEC games.
You're at Arkansas. You get Kentucky and Tennessee at home, and then you're at Georgia. Who Georgia might be one of the sneaky SEC teams of the year.
And Georgia, Wes Johnson's done a phenomenal job at Georgia. They might get in with being like super, super, super mediocre. But they've kind of just like treaded water and like they're 11th in the RPI. Like, I mean, if
you know what they reminded me of?
If they get the 14 wins they're in the SEC.
Like I was looking at their schedule before we did the last roundup because they were on a heater. And I was like, I looked at the schedule and I was like, I don't know, man. Like this is a tad bit softish. And they had a ton of wins. And I was like, I'm not going to bring it up. And I'm not doing this to pound my own back here. But I think this is like one of those classic examples of like taking over a program. Like you couldn't change the schedule. The schedule is what the schedule was when you take over. But like getting a team to actually learn how to win early, and then all of a sudden it starts to pay dividends when you get into conference play and you start playing a little bit of a tougher, like you figured out how to win games. Now all of a sudden it's like, well, we're not like, doesn't matter who we're playing. Like we can figure out a way to win some games. And I feel like that's what this Georgia team has done. And they've done a phenomenal job this year from what they've done, in previous years. And there was the coaching change after last year. And, they were, Georgia was the class of the class when we were in college. They were really good. But I thought that they were one of the kind of sneaky teams that, same kind of thing, like having them on your bingo card of being ranked and doing a really good job so far this year was not on my bingo card in the college baseball world. No. But the Florida schedule, you're at Arkansas this weekend, you're home against Tennessee, home against Kentucky, at Georgia to close it out. Like with UCF and Florida Atlantic sprinkled in there midweek. Like some tough baseball ahead.
We all know their track record midweek this year has not exactly been stellar, and both those teams are good. Both those teams are solid. Like FAU's a solid team.
Georgia's 9-9. 9-9 at this point in the year is going to probably get you in there. 11th in the RPI. Unless they really, squirrel down the. They're 20-1 out of conference. Holy moly!
Yeah,
they're gonna have to. They're gonna have to go on a.
So that's no good either. And then you got those two big dogs at home, but Kentucky and Tennessee at home. After what I just watched, and I watched Florida a lot, like they have me in a world of trouble. You got to go to Arkansas this weekend. I don't care. I don't care.
That's a tough task if you're the best team in the country to go into Arkansas. Like if you're A&M and go into Arkansas and win a series, that's never mind a team that's really struggling to find out who they are.
We're a little SEC heavy tonight. What do we before we break and talk about another conference? One team we haven't talked about at all this year is Vandy, who is quietly having a slow start ish, and I could see Vandy being one of those teams that ends up making a deeper run than expected this year.
I think I'm like off the Vandy train this year. They're just so bad on the road. and they're not going to host a regional, and they're not going to be a national host. But like, I just think that I could be in the minority here, but I just think like they're a non-factor. Like,
Okay.
They're
Tell us how
electric.
you really feel, Jonathan.
They're electric. No, they're just electric at home, but like they're not going to be a top. I mean, where I don't even know where they are. I mean, they're 18. They're not. Well, they could play their way into a host site. They're 3-7 on the road.
But you also know that the committee's gonna at some point gonna throw the RPI out because they're not just gonna let 10 SEC teams host, even if the math tells you that they should.
No, I know.
It gets really tough for them. I think it gets, even if they get into the top 12 RPI, like it still probably gets really tough for them to host because you got at least 4 that are going to Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, and A&M. Like they're going to host. They're probably going to be national seeds. And then ACC is going to get 3 more, right? So I think it gets tough for them to be a host.
It's not that I like don't like Vanderbilt. Like I think they're good. I've watched them. Like they're just. I just think there's just a clear step down from what we just talked about to them.
Are they that 5th SEC team right now?
I think them and South Carolina and Alabama are all probably tied. If I were to guess, you were to like.
I mean, talk about a Jekyll and Hyde team, though. As I brought this up, but you sweep Auburn at home, you're swept on the road at South Carolina, sweep Missouri at home, take 2 of 3 at LSU. That's when everyone was like, "Yikes!" Swept at A&M, and then you win the series with Florida at home. You got Mississippi State at home. You're at Georgia, home against Tennessee, at Kentucky to finish it out.
Yeah, I mean, we'll know more than by then.
Yes. But this could also be the conversation when we're having the regionals of like, remember when we had the conversation a couple weeks ago about they were on the road and all of a sudden they rattle off a ton of wins.
Yeah, they win the series at Tennessee and Kentucky, and you're like, oh, wow, Vanderbilt, like, it's SEC changed so quick.
Right.
Yeah, if that schedule they rolled out, I mean, listen, it's the end of April, guys. Like, we all know this. Like, we have no idea who's going to end up being. But, like, Vanderbilt could roll that schedule, and we're like, yo, Vandy's at that point, they'll be a top 8 seed easily if they roll that schedule. They'll be a mix to, do everything. And it's like, all right, yeah, let's do it. Just from what I've seen, though, and again, April 22nd, like that.
It's fair assessment.
Yeah, they're okay. Like, I mean, are they really good? Yeah, they're really good, but there's like 7 teams in the SEC that are really damn good. Like, probably more than that. It's like 10 of them, but like.
All right, Andy, what are your mid-majors you want to bring up?
Well, I'm going to go to the MAC right now.
Let's give the mid-majors love as we were mid-major guys and Division II guys.
We'll go to the MAC real quick. There's a 3-team race going on there. You got 2 11-1 teams in Niagara and Ryder, and then you got Fairfield, who has been really good in the last 5 years, and had an at-large bid, and I've had a ton of success in that program. They're sitting 10-2. But Niagara is the one that's interesting to me, and I know you ran into Rob recently, Keith, but I think they've won 16 of their last 18, and that team's playing good baseball right now. And, they're one of those teams that settled in after what is always a gauntlet to start the season when you're traveling down south and you're playing, warm weather teams that have gotten a lot more baseball under the belt than you do and been outside, and Niagara's kind of rolling right now, and they're an interesting squad there. And then the other one is Bryant has really taken a stranglehold on their conference, and they kind of been blasting people and have been doing some really good things and look to be the class of their conference up there. And I think that's a Northeast team that you get them in a regional. And they're the 4 seed that kind of is like, probably not going to win one, but they're not the team you want to face in the elimination game because they know how to win a little bit, and they got some guys in their lineup that are dangerous, and they got some arms at the front end that can beat you. And they're one of those Northeast teams that they probably lose game one to a number one seed, but if you're coming off of a loss, that's the team that you don't really want to see because they've got a little bit of pedigree. And obviously they got a history there of winning a bunch, starting with Steve Owens and have this year seemed to kind of be back in their winning ways. They're another team in the Northeast, and then not really mid-major, but UConn's rolling again. 7-2, started off slow, like they're 20-19, but 7-2 in the Big East, and one of those teams that like similar to Wake that you didn't get them down early, and now they're starting to figure out who they are and playing good baseball. Like, they look like they're the class of the Big East again, which is a conference that's been better this year than it's probably been in a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll go in order, I suppose, and I'll add one more in. But now, I Riders at the top with Niagara. I mean, I think it's super impressive, and I did run into Rob a couple of weeks ago when I was traveling with my wife for her games. But Niagara's, I mean, they got 24 wins already at the end of April. I mean, and they went and played at Michigan State on their bye week too, and I think they might have snuck a game out there. But for 24 wins out of a team from Niagara, New York, is pretty impressive. Like you're likely winning 30, if not more. Ryder's second in the country or tied actually for the lead in fielding percentage. I mean, you're going to win a ton of games regardless of where you are if you're fielding 983. Let alone if you're doing it in the MAC, like you're going to make a lot of plays and you're going to get a lot of outs and win a lot of games. I mean, Bronc ball with Dr. Barry Davis down there, like it's pretty successful. Fairfield's been really good for the last couple of years. Coach Courier's done a great job there. Brian Fay, who actually Jimmy and I recruited together before we both left Siena, but he had a great career there with Coach Rossi, and then he's become a pretty good coach. He's a younger guy in this game. So Fairfield's and Quinnipiac, I think is our Foxes, our beloved Foxes, are in 5th place right now. So hopefully we can keep that rolling. But Quinnipiac was off to a little bit of a slow start, and they've seemingly turned it around in the MAC there. But I think you're right. Niagara's pretty good. Ryder's kind of been the class of the league for the last couple of years. Bryant tearing apart the America East. They're 13-2. UMBC maybe a little bit of a surprise. I know Phil's the assistant there, who's a phenomenal human being. But they're not doing bad either there. I think the other one I wanted to highlight was in the NEC with Sacred Heart. What is it? Pat's second year there?
Yeah, that's
that's a program that like
won a lot of games.
Not have, and I don't know what they have there to work with and such, but they were not necessarily finding a lot of success. Under previous people, and they made a coaching change. And Pat, he's the pitching coach at Quinnipiac, who took over there. And they did really well last year. I mean, they're 15-6 in the NEC right now, and they're 19-18 right now. Like, I mean, that's pretty good for an NEC team in late April to be above 500 and 15-6 in conference. So. I thought that would be one to highlight from a mid-major standpoint too. Like that NEC is growing as a league. A lot more teams in it than there was in recent years, and I think there are a handful that are jumping back into the MAC. But I think Sacred Heart is actually going to the MAC. But it'd be 15-6 and above 500 in year 2 is a pretty good turnaround for a program that wasn't necessarily finding a lot of success in recent years.
Yeah, good highlight there. Pat's done an awesome job to get them back in the mix, and whatever he's doing is working. Those kids are winning some games. He had a couple good wins early in the season, and then anytime when you're in one of those Northeast conferences, you're ultimately judged by how you do against your in conference competition. And to go 15-6, Bryant 13-2, like those are statements that you're better than you're better than the people that you compete against the most during the course of the year, and gives yourself a chance to get into the NCAA tournament. So yeah, kudos to those guys. Those guys are playing good baseball right now.
We'd be remiss to throw in a Columbia Lions.
Yeah,
Coach Peretti.
I had my shot. I can't, that's my one thing.
Sorry, go ahead.
Patriot League, here it comes, Coach Grosse. Andy left it on a tee for me, dude, and you sniped that?
I'm sorry. My bad.
please take it.
I'll hit you with the chest.
The Lions are tearing it up. The Lions are tearing it up at 12-3. But what I will say with the Ivy League, which I think is phenomenal, Cornell's 10-5. Absolutely legit job. Coach Pep is killing it with those dudes. I think if any of us said that Cornell would be 10-5, win series against Columbia, a win series against Penn. They beat Yale this weekend. Phenomenal job by those dudes. The other one I think that's kind of surprising is if we go to the Patriot League, Holy Cross 9-9 in third place, which I think is awesome, and Lafayette 8-10. Not like the biggest shocks in the entire world, but I think both those staffs have done a really good job in year 2 and 3 to do a really nice job to kind of turn things around with those programs, because I think in that league it's very, obviously competitive, like the Ivy League is, and a lot of the schools are very, very similar. So I think what Coach Tinks and those guys are doing over at Holy Cross and at Lafayette, I think it's super impressive.
Agreed. Yeah, getting over that Army hurdle is a tough one for everybody. That's just kind of a machine right now, and Chris continues to no pun intended, hold the line. But Army's really good, and Holy Cross and Lafayette have made a pretty big jump from last year. Definitely a big step forward for those two programs. And interestingly enough, Navy's made a big jump. They made that coaching change. Costi retired. And you had, kind of a quasi new staff. I know Kaner stayed on, but, I think they got 14 wins in conference right now, and they were not a great team last year. And, that conference is certainly seen some little bit more competitive in the middle there than it's been in recent years. And yeah, kudos to those guys. Are doing a pretty good job.
The Crusaders had a win over Kansas State at the beginning of the year, top 25 win.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. Anything else you guys want to add this evening?
There's some good Division II and Division III baseball being played right now. It's getting pretty interesting at the Division II and Division III level too. So I think it'd be remiss to Denison's on a tear. The NESCAC looks to be pretty competitive. Colby is on the brink of being ranked, if they aren't already. Middlebury's been pretty good. RPI is quite possibly hosting the tournament. They've played really good baseball. So I think the
Cardinals.
The Catholic Cardinals are playing really good baseball right now. They've beaten the last 2 or 3 weeks. They've beaten a midweek ranked opponent every week. So they've been doing a really good job. It's my timeline on Twitter. I'm a little scatterbrained, but my timeline on Twitter is just filled with a bunch of stuff. So I'm trying to cover as much as I possibly can. But there's a lot of really good baseball being played right now, and it's fun. Division II is starting to wind down. Division III is winding down. Division III will be into conference tournaments by the end of the month, and into I think this is next weekend is the last weekend in the ODAC. And then I know most tournaments will start like the first weekend in May. So we got playoff baseball coming up, which will be exciting at that level too.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to find some time to dig into that because I think we need to shed some light on the level of competition there. It's a little bit easier to talk about the Division One. It's a little bit more relatable, but we all know that the Division Two and Division Three level play some super competitive, fun baseball. And
we might have to do a Division Three playoff podcast.
Oh, God, it'd be great.
Oh yeah,
I'm in. I'm totally in. If you guys are,
Of course.
don't threaten us with a good time, Jonathan.
No, do not.
When the tournament comes out, we'll run it out. Start dropping some names. Highlight Bobby Picardo and his genius with the Catholic Cardinals.
one of my dudes, one of my good friends,
Yeah, he's got one of your guys, the Tazi kid's tearing it up right now.
tearing it up. Best kid, one of the best kids ever.
All right. Well, gentlemen, appreciate you. Check in soon. Jonathan, good luck this week with the high school boys, and we'll have you on here in a couple
Thanks,
weeks.
guys.
And we'll see what we got right and make fun of what we got wrong and go from there.
Appreciate you guys having me on. Always a great
All right,
time.
yeah, man. Talk to you guys soon. Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.